So you say that you initially started with kind of Kuko's story. When did it start shifting to Doris's story?
I think it was mostly at that concert, really. But I also, Kuko was going through his own. I mean, it's just challenging to blow up that fast, and I think I was really transparent out the gate. I was like, I don't know how long this documentary is going to last. This is not a documentary in the way that you might expect it to be. Like, I'm not doing a sit-down interview. I'm going to be following you, hopefully, for the next few years. And there was admittedly just some reticence from him in terms of doing that. And but beyond that, like I was really just interested in looking at Doris as a manager and kind of looking at using her as an entry point into many musicians' different lives. I mean, I thought Kuko, I love Kuko's music, and I think I'm really inspired by what he is doing, but I also wanted to meet other musicians as well.
So you talked a little bit about how you wanted to do something different. When, the story is framed with Doris's voiceover, how did that come about, and what was that relationship? Because, we are kind of seeing it through her eyes.
So that was really intentional from the beginning. I wanted the film to feel like a coming-of-age film, and when I was looking for inspiration, I kept going back to looking for inspiration in terms of films or series that had kind of made a huge impact on me when I was like a teen or in my 20s. I thought of like Clueless and Sex and the City, and more recently Euphoria, and I mean, one common theme was that there was voiceover. So from the start, I knew that I wanted to use that. I also, again, coming from television producing, had experience working with correspondents and collaborating with them on kind of voiceover for television segments. And so that was intentional from the beginning. I was like, I'm going to shoot this verite. I'm not going to depend on voiceover as a tool to like tell story, but merely to give kind of insight into the protagonist's brain. And so, ooh, there goes my lipstick. So that was intentional from the beginning. It was really a lot harder than I had anticipated because I really wanted it to feel like authentically like Doris's voice. And so so the process was this. I mean, basically during the edit, I basically came up with like temporary voiceover, similar to like the process I had done in television producing. Kind of come up with a script for that, and that temporary voiceover was informed by dozens of interviews that I conducted throughout the production that I had shot as a backup just in case, and just to also kind of get emotionally, like make sure that I got emotions in the moment that Doris was feeling them. And there's actually like a couple of interviews in cars that made it into the film because I just thought they were too important. And then I scoured her journals, and then I went through all of her Instagram posts, and I kind of like crafted voiceover that felt like it incorporating her language. Things like "aquí nomás manifestando," like that's a phrase that she uses a lot. So I tried to incorporate that. So that was kind of the template. And then I brought in Jessica Salgado and Walter Thompson Hernandez, who are two LA-based writers who grew up here, because I wanted the voiceover to feel also authentically of this community. Like, I'm Latina, but I grew up in Connecticut, different experience. So I brought them, and I'm also, I wanted writers in the room, and so they kind of came into the process and helped shaped it even further. And then I did dozens and dozens of voiceover sessions with Doris where she would pull up the script, and most of the time it was for performance, but sometimes she'd say, that doesn't feel right, and we would re-script it and try it again, and so it was definitely. Oh, and along the way, Chris Bachman, our story consultant, and Ora de Kornfeld, our editor, were really kind of looking at the voiceover for kind of narrative, like the narrative timing of the voiceover and where we needed to have it. So it was a really big labor of love.
That's interesting. So in this writing process, did you find yourself going back to the edit and changing things around as well? Like, were these two kind of organisms like living symbiotically?
Yeah, totally. Although I will say, I think we had a lot of verite material to pull from. So it was mostly that the writing was responding to the edit, and not necessarily the other way around. I mean, the other thing is just that, like, the film very intentionally occupies these two spaces of reality being juxtaposed with dream, and there was a lot of thought that went into the visual language of these two different spaces, and the voiceover more often than not occupies kind of a more ethereal, suspended reality space. And so that was kind of another thing that really drove the pacing of the voiceover. Jennifer Teixeira, who was one of the first editors on the film, we really kind of paced out these dreamlike sequences and tried to be really mindful of the pacing of that. So I think it was, that voiceover was more often than not reacting to the edit. But yeah, they did work symbiotically just in terms of pacing.
So when you were describing this writing process, you mentioned that Doris gave you access to her journals.
It's true, yeah.
And
She ripped out a page where I saw my name in it. I still don't know what it says.
I'm sure it's all great things. All great
Hopefully.
things. But yeah, I mean, and just in general, this is such an intimate portrait. I mean, the vulnerability that Doris and Jacks display on screen, as well as with their families, and how did that trust come about? How did you build that trust, and how did you kind of prove that, hey, this is this, like, I can be the one to tell this story?
I mean, it's a really challenging process in every documentary, and it's one that continues to develop constantly. I think that with Doris and Jacks, we initially, I think, developed trust because there was a shared vocabulary about what the purpose of the film was about. Like, I think all being daughters of immigrants, I think we all have very, very disparate experiences, but there's a lot of themes, there's a lot of commonality between us in terms of some of the themes that are explored throughout the film, and I think we all really kind of were able to build trust in terms of believing in kind of the importance of these kinds of stories being told. But yeah, I think trust, as is, it's true of every relationship. It's an ongoing conversation.
And you had talked about it a little before, but kind of the framing of, I mean, as you mentioned, this documentary kind of exists as a music doc and also as an immigration doc, and also, as a coming of age film. But I think what I found really striking about the kind of the immigration layer of it is that, many of the films that we see about immigration kind of deal with the process of it and the bureaucracy of it, and this really just deals with the emotions of it and like what it's like to be in that situation, not necessarily, we're not watching them file papers. And so I'd love for you to talk a little bit about kind of making that very, that very like deliberate choice in kind of portraying the family and, what they go through in this process.
Yeah, I mean, I think after covering immigration for a long time, consuming a lot of immigration, storytelling, I was really trying to stay away from some of the tropes And I wanted it to feel, I wanted it to feel different than at least the kind of storytelling I'd done in the past. To your point, some of that storytelling has been grounded in process. So much trauma is a result of the bureaucracy of the process. But I think that I wanted to stay grounded in emotions because I wanted the film to be able to be accessible to folks that may not understand this experience, or even, yeah, I mean, in the worst case scenario, maybe not even want to understand the scenario, the process, but just like be able to connect to the emotions of the story. And so I just felt like there could be connection for viewers in the universality of some of these themes. And beyond that, I mean, you point out how it's not kind of focused on process. You know, even her parents' legal process, I was kind of intentionally evasive about, like, you know, all of the paperwork and like, I wanted even the conversation between her and her brother to feel like really colloquial and accessible. But beyond even just kind of avoiding things like process, like there are other kind of tropes that I was avoiding as well. The visual language of immigration films, just kind of the fixation on victimization. And I wanted to just show, you know, agency in the story. And I also, I really wanted to center the children of immigrants, and namely the American-born children of immigrants, and kind of explore the nuanced experiences, emotions of those experiences that are, you know, aren't exclusively just about pain, drama, and loss. I mean, those emotions are certainly present, but other emotions like guilt, because I felt like, and I feel like a lot of those emotions are often unexplored in immigration storytelling.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're, you know, when they go into not just the guilt that they feel, but also the inherited fears and dreams, and the pressure of, you know, kind of being the one who needs to be stable in order to kind of make sure that the family keeps, you know, stays afloat. I think all of those things, especially for someone who is artistically inclined, as you know, we see, can be really difficult to have, you know, these two worlds interact. And so actually, that's a great segue into Jax, who kind of appears halfway through the film-ish, and you know, in some ways, almost seems like, you know, you're kind of taking Doris' story, where she's at this crossroads where, you know, she's kind of in this new phase of her career, and also there's COVID, and then it's almost a window into maybe some version of what she went through when she was a little bit younger, kind of, you know, entering this new arena where, hey, maybe there's not as much stability as, you know, a job in finance. Can you talk a little bit about how, you know, kind of Jax came into the picture, and how you know, what the process was in deciding that you're gonna weave her story into Doris's?
So, I mean, Doris was at a real crossroads in her career, in her life, and the pandemic really had the music industry at a total standstill, and Doris was just trying to figure out what was next. She didn't want to be a manager anymore, but she still kind of had this, like, she really has this compulsion towards like being very excited when she sees other talent and young talent and new talent, and I think that's from many years of having worked not just as a manager but in the industry. And so she had found Jax on Instagram, like in an Instagram kind of like rabbit hole, like follow, you know, it just ended up on Jax's Instagram page, and she started listening to her music, and I mean, I can vouch for this because I was ostensibly like her pod, like I was over all the time, and she was just listening to it all the time, and she became like really, really. She just became really excited about her music, and I think it really resonated with her, especially in that time. And so she, at the time, was doing kind of a mentorship program during the pandemic. She was like hosting talk series with industry members, and had decided to put management on hold, but I think she saw Jacks and got really excited at the opportunity of kind of mentoring her. And when she mentioned this to me, like, first she told me, like, oh, Isabel, like, what do you think of this music? She, like, and I mean, I became obsessed with it. I really love 3 a.m., and I really am a big fan of Jax's music. And so I started listening to it all the time, and then I looked at her Instagram, and I started going to her music videos and her self-made music videos, and I got really excited about that. And then I set up a bunch of, I did something that is kind of unusual in that I wanted to try to build a relationship with Jax directly as opposed to through Doris, because Doris, with her manager hat, can be a little bit difficult in order to, like, she kind of becomes a barrier between the filmmaker and the musician. And so I said, like, you know, with your permission, can I reach out to her first? And so I talked to her. I flew out to Texas to meet her before Doris had met her. And then as soon as I met her, I was just like, oh my God, I mean, this girl is just so charismatic, and her music is so beautiful.
So I'd love to talk a little bit about the scene, one of the scenes near the end. You know, for a film that's kind of dipping its, you know, that kind of dips in different things. You know, when we think about notions of Americanism and what it means to be American, the scene where they open those envelopes and they have their green cards, I think was really emotional. It was a really emotional experience, and it's kind of one of those moments where you like feel proud. You feel pride, even though like I don't know these people personally. I'd love to, you know, just hear a little bit about. I mean, it seems like Doris was shooting that herself. So kind of what when that video got to you, and you know, like what was that process like when you finally found out and you saw it?
Oh my God, I mean, so we knew when that, oh, actually, that's another reason I started filming with Doris and focus the movie on her, is that when I met her, I started to learn more about the fact that her family was eminently going to find out about their green card status. And so I knew that that was going to be an incredibly moving thing to try to document, and her family was all super down for me to do that. However, I mean, you can't, you know, much to my, I mean, I tried as hard as possible. Like, I had so much paranoia about, like, leaving the LA city, like, I mean, LA at all, just because I didn't want to miss it. And so, I mean, I wanted to film the scene of them opening their the green cards and reuniting, because they had told me that they were going to drive down to Tijuana as soon as they got their green card. So I was like, I need to be close by. And then the pandemic hit. And so there's COVID, like, I don't, you know, like, we're doing PCR tests. I mean, it was just, so I begrudgingly was like, okay, we're going to film it on phones, and hopefully this works. First it was camcorders. I shipped everybody a camcorder, did tutorials, and then it was like every morning, like, I would wake up and text them, be like, please, please don't forget to charge your camcorder. And then I realized, like, okay, iPhone's probably better. And so I told everybody, like, I would call them regularly and be like, landscape, you gotta flip the phone, flip it. Like, I don't want a vertical, I was like, it's such an asshole. Like, you're telling these people in the most sensitive moment of their life to be like, flip the phone. I just like was like instant. I mean, so it was like this ongoing conversation. And then the other unnerving thing is that the timeline of the film is actually, you know, edited as documentaries are, you know, happen. But Trump actually suspended. So they get their green cards, and then Trump suspended all green card applications like 5 days later. But it was like eminent in the news. They were like, green card applications, all green cards are gonna be suspended. Basically, borders are closing. So I'm like, like the documentary is gonna go on forever. And also they're not gonna get their green cards. This is awful. And they, by the time that they got their green cards, I'd already missed like 2 Christmas, like there's a Christmas that isn't in the film. Like they had been waiting, and like I mean, as is true of all immigration timelines, it's always just a million times longer. So imagine my surprise when I'm like driving on the highway one day and Doris calls me and she's like, Isabel, my parents just got my green card. And I'm like, shut the fuck up. Did you film it? And she sends me the video and it's landscape and I screamed. It's like I didn't even get off the off ramp. I like pulled over on the highway on like the 90 miles an hour. And I was just so emotional. And I was like, yeah. I mean, this is, again, like, it's so weird to be a documentary filmmaker, but I was like, this is amazing. And then immediately I called up, you know, our partner. I was like, we got to film. Like, we did it. Like, because I just knew we were going to have a story after that happened.
Has everyone seen the film?
Yes, to my knowledge.
You know, was there anything, any like feedback from them, or was, you know, I mean, did they, especially from like the parent side of things, because I feel like, you know, there's probably an inner life that their child has, and especially in relation to kind of their struggles, you know, how did they feel about kind of seeing their story on screen?
Yeah, so I say to my knowledge because I don't know if Jax's mother has watched it or not. But Doris's family has watched it many times, and her parents have watched it many, many times. And I think that they feel, yeah, I mean, they get, it's very emotional to watch it with them. And it's very moving to watch it. Every single time I watch it with them, I cry.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that with us. Yeah, as you said, so beautiful. Feel really lucky to have seen these stories on screen. At one point, Doris says about Kuko's music that he was making music for kids unseen and unheard, and I really feel like this film is also doing that work. So thank you so much.
No, thank you all for coming. Thank you.